the topic of hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. Fracking is a form of natural gas extraction that was developed in the late 1940s, but it's recently become much more widespread and also has become very controversial as of late. So all of our panelists tonight have had some form of experience with the topic, and they'll be bringing their unique knowledge and perspective to the table.
So our panelists tonight include Catherine Abreu from the Ecology Action Center, there on your far left. And then we have Sherry Somerville, on your far right, from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And Heidi Verhoel is here from Sierra Club. And then of course we're waiting for Shelley Young, and she's the Aboriginal advisor for Nova Scotia. So we have some questions and discussion points to facilitate the conversation, but we do also encourage respectful conversation between the panelists and the audience. We're going to have breaks throughout to allow the audience to address the panelists, and then at the end we're going to have approximately 15 minutes for another session of questions. So we'd like to start off by introducing our professor, Dr. Tony Charles, and he's also the director of the School of the Environment, and he's going to be facilitating the questions this evening.
Across the table first?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's do that. So I'd like to welcome everyone here today, and it's a very impressive turnout of folks in the room tonight. It was suggested that you were attracted by the food that's outside here, but I'm sure that's not really the reason. But there is some, and coffee, tea, and other drinks outside there. So feel free to help yourselves. So I'd like to welcome you here. This is an event entirely organized by students at St. Mary's University. You just heard from a couple of them. Students in environmental studies and environmental science class, senior level class here at St. Mary's. And I must say I'm very proud of what they've done this whole week, a whole series of events, and this being just one of them over the course of the week. It was up to the students to decide what topics to cover, whether to organize a vermiculture composting workshop, a farmer's market, a mind shift event, and many others. Tonight's one, of course, on hydraulic fracturing or fracking. We've got a panel that, again, the students invited, and I'm very pleased that you were able to accept to come tonight. Perhaps we could start off just, and we're missing Shelley Young, but just to start off with brief introductions from the three of you, if you could, just so people know who they're hearing from. And then I'm going to get into a series of scripted questions from the students devised to ask the panel members, and we'll have, as they mentioned, breaks in between for questions from the audience. So, would you like to go first at either end there?
They're all going to be okay. My name is Sherry Somerville. I am the Natural Gas Advisor in New Brunswick for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. CAP, I'll call it CAP from going forward, represents 110 or 100 producing companies of liquid natural gas, oil sands, and crude oil throughout Canada. We have 100 members and 150 associate members that supply those 100 members. It represents about $110 billion of revenues per year, and 90% of the oil and gas producers in the country of Canada. So I joined CAP about a year and a half ago because in New Brunswick we do have some activity going on there, oil and gas and development, and they formed a New Brunswick Oil and Gas Association, which consists of Southwestern Resources, Contact Exploration, Corridor Resources, Emera Pipeline, and Maritimes and Northeast Pipeline, to help educate the public about what it is they're doing, how they do the process of hydraulic fracturing and extract the gas, and why natural gas is important to the Atlantic Canadian economy. So I've been traveling around, mostly in New Brunswick, but we're starting to come to Nova Scotia now because, of course, it's an issue here that people have questions and concerns that they want addressed as well. So doing a little bit of traveling in Nova Scotia now. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just before I introduce myself, I would just like to take a moment and acknowledge that we are on unceded Mi'kmaq land, and I think it's very important to acknowledge this even before we begin these sorts of discussions, to kind of bring that history to the front of our mind and make that aware. And I just want to express my gratitude that I'm able to be here, and I'm sure many of you as well, to have this conversation and be a part of this. My name is Heidi Verhoel. I am with Sierra Club Canada, Atlantic Canada chapter. I've been with Sierra Club since 2009, initially as an environmental educator. That's where my passion is, that's what I want to be doing. In 2011, I discovered that Atlantic Industrial Services was handling the waste in Debert, and I am from a small community upstream from there, a place called Belmont, and part of that runs through my parents' property. So that's how I first became initiated into the rabbit hole of unconventional resource extraction. Since then, I've done many public meetings. I've worked on a few different projects. This past fall, I was part of a campaign called Strengthening Our Voice, and I was very fortunate to be able to go to all 4 of the Atlantic provinces and meet with community groups about unconventional resource development, otherwise known oftentimes by fracking, but I think we're talking about the ball that is unconventional resource development here. And yeah, so that's why I'm here, and I encourage you out there to not take my word for whatever I say, but I will be pointing to documents and research, and I encourage you to read those resources. I can provide you with a list afterwards if you want to go and read them and ask those questions yourself and decide for yourself where you stand on this very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I am Catherine Abreu. I'm the Energy Coordinator at the Ecology Action Center. So I design and manage our energy and climate change related campaigns. The Ecology Action Center also has an acronym. I'll use EAC. And we at this point are a 43-year-old organization. We're one of the largest environmental advocacy organizations in the country. And we have just over 3,000 members in Nova Scotia. I also, a few years ago, was one of the founding members of a coalition called NoFrack, the Nova Scotia Fracking Resource and Action Coalition. And that coalition has brought together a huge amount of individuals and organizations from across Nova Scotia to share information and developed an informed approach to fracking in this province.
Thank you. Now, some of the questions I have tonight are directed at individuals. Others are for everyone. I'm going to start off with a question for Sherry Somerville of CAP. This is sort of a basic educational question. For those who may not know, can you give us a brief overview of the technical details of hydraulic fracturing for gas?
Brief technical.
Yeah, okay. Brief and understandable.
Well, and I'll try to do my best. It is a complex subject. There's a lot involved with it, but I like to often start with a global energy perspective. We all use energy every day. We drive cars that use gas. We power our electronics, our hair products, blow dryers and stuff. We're users of energy. We're great consumers of energy. Globally, this is increasing because, of course, quality of life is improving across the globe. People are using more electronic products, etc. And if you go to the International Energy Association, you can see they have charts there that project the global energy demand and where the sources of energy are coming from over the next 25 years. And they project that the next 25 years will see us still relying on fossil fuels, and that is coal, oil, natural gas. The remaining 20% comes from renewables, nuclear, bioenergy. The fact of the matter is that because of the demand, we can't meet it if we switch primarily to renewables. We still have to look at fossil fuels. Natural gas is the greenest of those fossil fuels comparative to oil and coal. So that explains why people are looking for new sources of natural gas. Traditionally, one of the questions that I get quite often is, why are we using hydraulic fracturing? Is hydraulic fracturing new? Hydraulic fracturing is not new. It has been used for decades to access gas below, or natural gas and oil below the Earth's surface. In fact, in New Brunswick, They were doing the first oil and gas wells in 1859 in a community called Dover, just outside of Moncton. And back then, they used to use nitroglycerin to hydraulically fracture wells. They were conventional vertical wells that went straight down to wherever the resource was. What is new now are the advancements in technology and the ability to go down below the Earth's surface and take your drill bit and turn it and drill down on the diagonal or drill down on the horizontal and go out 2 to 3 kilometers. So where you normally would have to drill down vertical wells, and many of them on the Earth's surface, to access your hydrocarbons, whether it be oil or gas, now you can do one well pad with up to 20 wells on that single well pad, which will measure 300 meters by 100 meters, and go down to wherever your depth is. And in the case of New Brunswick, the shale and the tight sandstone where you can access those hydrocarbons are 1,500 to 2,000 meters below the Earth's surface, which is about 2 kilometers. And then go out on the horizontal and access those in a more advanced way. And what they do, they will use water. We get the question quite often, why do they use the water? They need to hydraulically pressure up, send that water down at a high pressure to fracture the rock or the sandstone that is withholding the hydrocarbons. It's in very, very tight pores. And so they will send a mixture of water or propane. In New Brunswick, we actually have used, for half of our wells, Corridor Resources has used propane instead of water. Propane travels down, is able to crack the shale much more efficiently. And it also, because it's a gas, will travel up with the natural gas and can be repurposed and reused. So you don't necessarily have to use water. Some companies will, some will use the propane. So they send that down through the pipes to the depth. There's a mixture of water, sand, and chemical additives that they use, and each chemical has a purpose, whether it's to help carry the sand down or to prevent the clay from swelling so the gas can't get back up. But they send that down there at high pressures. It cracks the rock or the sandstone or whatever the formation is in the geology. The sand is left there to prop the geology open so the gas can travel back up to the surface and be collected and fed into a gas plant where it's treated or it's separated out, or whether they take different particles and feed it into, take the gas and feed it into the pipelines. In the case of New Brunswick in Sussex, the gas that comes out of the McCully field, we have 29 producing gas wells currently, and half of it goes to the Potash Corporation to help fuel their operations. The other half is fed into a pipeline and is sent to customers, or where have you, within Canada or abroad. So the basic essential things to know about hydraulic fracturing is that yes, we do use water or propane. It is well below the Earth's surface, these gases are. Critical to going down below the surface, many people will ask about the aquifers that we have to travel through. Your freshwater aquifers are at about 150 meters to 200 meters. Key to that is making sure that you have your wellbore integrity, which means you're going to have multiple layers of cement and steel around your casing as you travel down through those aquifers and even deeper until you get to the shale or the sandstone. So we make sure that it's critical we have the proper wellbore integrity there with the cement and the steel. We travel down below the Earth's surface. We send the sand, water, and chemicals down there to fracture the rock and so that the gas can be returned. Conventionally, like I said before, you used to have to do it vertically. Now we can do it out on the horizontal, which is a much more efficient, more advanced way to get the gas. In Canada, more than 175,000 wells have been hydraulically fractured over the last 60 years. In New Brunswick, since 1985, 49 wells have been hydraulically fractured. And it's key to point out too, hydraulic fracturing is not just for natural gas, it's also for oil. We have an oil field out in Stony Creek near Moncton. There's 18 producing oil wells, and those wells send 55 barrels of oil per month to the Irving refinery to be refined. So I don't know if that sums it up. No, it's...
That is, that seemed to cover.
Okay. I imagine there'll be a lot of questions.
And as
so.
a timekeeper, that's right on time. So
it was.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thank you, Sherry. Now the next question is for all the panelists. Let's start with Catherine here. From your perspective, what are the key, and this is the same question for all three of you, what are the key benefits, whether social, economic, or environmental, of the utilization of hydraulic fracturing? Key benefits.
I would say that probably the key benefit of shale gas So hydraulic fracturing is the technology that's used to liberate natural gas from shale rock formations. Shale gas at this point, particularly in the United States, is quite plentiful. And what plenty means is that it's cheap. And so we've encountered this relatively new, plentiful energy source that is flooding the market and is therefore selling at a pretty low price. So that is a key benefit, particularly when the costs of more familiar fossil fuels, so conventional natural gas, coal, oil, is subject to increasing fluctuations in the market. The volatility of markets for those fossil fuels has been going up and up. For instance, in Nova Scotia this year, we used more coal to produce electricity than we were anticipating because we didn't have as much access to natural gas as we have in the past at an affordable price. And so in a situation where the affordability of the other fossil fuels that we are used to using to turn on our lights and cook our dinners and run our cars, having access to that new, plentiful, cheap fossil fuel resource can be seen as beneficial. Natural gas also is something that is traditionally called a transitional fuel amongst environmentalists, I would suggest. So what we mean by that is as we move away from fossil fuel dependence toward developing renewable energy, natural gas can be a useful way to move that transition along. So we can change our coal-fired generation plants to use natural gas instead. And we like natural gas because conventional natural gas is a lower greenhouse gas emitter. It emits about 1/3 of the greenhouse gases of coal. And that's why for quite a long time environmentalists have said, listen, we're not just saying turn off all the fossil fuels immediately and turn on all of the renewables. We are talking about a transition, and we're talking about using lower emitting fossil fuels as we make that transition. But I'm sure we'll talk about this a little later on. Part of the difficulty of unconventional natural gas, of shale gas, is that it's quite questionable whether they have that, shale gas has that greenhouse gas savings that we're kind of used to applying to natural gas.
Thank you. Heidi, 3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 minutes. I did this in 3 minutes. Benefits. Well, I just want to make something clarify something a little bit. Yes, as Sherry was saying, we have been using their hydraulic fracturing has been used for 40 years. However, that's been for conventional oil and gas resources. We can hydraulically fracture a water well. We can hydraulically fracture an oil well. That's just the process of breaking up the rock. And in conventional wells, it's creating a pool so that that resource can come to the surface. When we're talking about unconventional resource development, we're talking about oil and gas that is locked into rock, and we must use hydraulic fracturing along with chemical additives, along with the horizontal drilling, along with high volumes of water to be able to access that. And we need to do it with many wells coming out of one well pad and then many well pads to create the surface area, because this gas doesn't migrate, it's locked into the rock. So all these wells are to create this surface area so as much gas as possible can be accessed. That's why I use the term unconventional resource development as opposed to just the term hydraulically fracturing. But I think that's what we mean when we're talking about hydraulically fracturing. I personally don't see any benefit into putting money and resources and development into developing this industry here in Atlantic Canada, because I do think there is alternative energy sources that we could put our money and our resources into that we would see benefit from. And the only one benefit that I can see is when I go to community meetings and I see people who have never signed a petition come out to a community meeting. When I see different groups connecting and networking on an issue, I feel like the only benefit is the massive civic education projects that's happening as people want to educate themselves. So I feel that is the benefit, is public engagement on such a very important issue in terms of energy and meeting the demands that we need to. So that's the only benefit I can see, and we're risking everything else to go after this resource.
Okay, but there is a benefit. No, sorry. Sherry.
That's the first one. And I see many more than that in terms of, as an industry, we will be the first to tell you that we're not perfect, that there's risk with every industry with what we do. And we try to do the best that we can to try to mitigate the environmental impacts, such as land surface, what we take up, such as the chemicals that we do use. Companies are working on greener chemical additives. Companies are working on renewable energy sources, not just fossil fuel extraction as well. So, we all look to the future and try to see better ways of doing what we're doing to satisfy the needs of our lives and energy. From a natural gas perspective, and I do want to make it clear, shale gas is natural gas. There is no difference. Tight gas is natural gas. Gas from coal bed methane is natural gas. It is natural gas. To have a domestic supply of natural gas would be a great thing for attracting new businesses and new companies. Irving Oil has stood up and said if it wants to look at expanding its business, it will need to look at a supply of natural gas so it can reduce costs and have a stable energy supply. McCain Foods is now using natural gas. Michelin has said it will be using natural gas. So in order to attract other types of businesses and to compete on a global level, we need to have a supply of natural gas. And there's only two ways to do it. You either produce it or you buy it. So if you're going to be buying it, you're going to be buying it from other places in Canada and in the US, and so you're going to add to your costs. So if we have it here and we can produce it and use it cheaply and reliably for our companies here, that's what they're looking at doing. That also creates jobs. Deloitte worked with the New Brunswick Business Council to do a study based on the estimated reserves that we might have in New Brunswick, and they estimated that 21 full-time jobs would be created for every one well pad. An investment of $13 million would go into that. Contributions to the GDP for that one well pad would be about $4.5 million. And in terms of jobs, direct would be 21 during the exploration and development process, and then probably about 54 indirect and induced. So they usually say it's about 20 people will work on a drill rig while you're drilling and fracking, and 60 people will support it in terms of restaurants, land surveying, environmental, fencing, uniform cleaning, and that sort of thing. So I think a domestic supply can help us attract future business. A domestic supply of natural gas and focusing on our reserves can help build jobs. And then also you pay revenues and royalties, so there's taxes that you pay on that, and there's royalties that go into the government that help fund things like social services, hospitals, schools, and the like. And I know in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia is still looking at it. They've got their moratorium in place and they're still looking at the rules. We announced our rules in New Brunswick on February of last year. They took from best practices across North America and put them in place. Companies are looking to those now. We also announced our royalties, which are going to be to the tune of, during exploration, 4% will be paid to the government, and then once they get up and producing, it'll be 25% of what they're producing will go into the government for royalties. So I see those three key tenets as beneficial to extracting natural gas.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question flips this around, as you might imagine it would. And let's start with Heidi, and then Sherry, and then Catherine, if we could. What do you believe to be the most significant adverse impacts about using hydraulic fracturing for natural gas?
I have 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay, go. All right. Everything. What are the most significant adverse impacts? For one, health. There are several studies. This is just one of a 3-year study done in Colorado on air quality of people within a half mile, and benzenes and stuff in the air making people sick, peer-reviewed science. I'll open up the binder of goodness. There are a whole host of health impacts, whether you're talking about the chemicals that are being put into the water when it goes down underground, but when it comes back up, it also comes back up with those chemicals and a whole host host of other stuff that's underneath the ground, like heavy metals, like radioactive substances, like toxic substances, like arsenic, which we know is in Nova Scotia water supply in certain areas. So there's obviously health concerns with water, with the air. So there's a whole section, if anybody wants to talk to me after, because I can't summarize all this this is scientific or independent community research on health impacts in terms of air and water quality. There has been, the EPA did a study they submitted kind of a summary of a report from Pavilion, Wyoming, where there was a confirmed case where water was contaminated by unconventional resource extraction. So it has happened. Let's see, okay, environment. There's water implications in terms of contamination, in terms of large volumes of water being extracted out of water bodies like rivers and streams. In many areas in Atlantic Canada, there have been summers where water is drying up. And it's important for fish populations, it's important for agriculture, it's hugely important. I think there are risks to local economies. One of our biggest industries we have in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and PEI is tourism. And it's just, they rejected the lease that's along, so on Western Newfoundland, there's all these leases that were along, Shoal Point Energy had them. They took away, the Newfoundland government took away the one that was right along Gros Morne because they realized the potential revenue loss of losing a World Heritage designation at Gros Morne Park. So they recognized that there is a risk to economy, to local economies and businesses. And also, when we're talking about, there may be some royalties and benefits coming in, we also have to talk about the externalities, the things that they don't pay for, like the roads. Yes, there may be royalties coming in, but will that cover the cost of roads? Already, our roads are a mess in the springtime. And if we have heavy truck traffic driving back and forth, thousands of truckloads to different well pads and stuff, what is that going to do to our roads? Will we get enough royalty to actually cover the cost of roads? Well, in North Dakota, they received $3.3 billion in royalty from the industry, but they have $7 billion of damage to the roads. Also the cost of cleaning up, mitigating spills, huge adverse impacts that could happen if this industry is here and if it's like full steam ahead. So I tried to do that in 3 minutes. I succeeded. Okay. Okay. I had more, but I hope not.
Sherry. Oh, yeah, over to you.
To your point, there's concerns people have. Ones I hear most out in the community are water use, where you're getting your water from, how much are you using. Typically a frac will take about 4 million liters of water per frac. You'll do 3 to 8 fracs per well, so you're looking at about 20 million liters of water. That's similar to what a pulp and paper mill would use. It's similar to what, if you go to CSIR, the Canadian Society of Unconventional Resources, they've got some information about water use there. One of the examples that they pull up, is that 20 million liters are used to green a golf course during a season. So to keep a golf course green. So yes, we do use water, and in some cases, we're talking about in New Brunswick, we use propane. We are adapting the rules, or I should say the government is adapting the rules. Industry is looking at different sources of water, becoming water neutral. If we can use it from the ocean, in New Brunswick we've mandated, the new rules have mandated that that's the first choice for where we can go for water. And as long as it's not too saline, too salty, we can take some of the salt out and use some of that water. But there is levels of water that we can use, the last being from a municipal source. You have to go through environmental improvements and work with the government in terms of where you can source the water, and people are concerned about watersheds and recharging them, and we are too. So environmental water use, environmental impacts, as we mentioned, the chemicals. In terms of the chemicals, we're working on greener additives. We do use chemicals. We support the full disclosure. If you go in the West Coast, if you go to a website called frackfocus.ca, you can actually pull up, select a well, a PDF document will pull up, and it'll be what was submitted to the government in terms of what chemicals were added to the well to frack that particular well. So we do support full disclosure of that. And then, yes, just mitigating the environmental impacts in terms of wellbore integrity, and that's key, to make sure that your cement, the integrity of your cement is withheld, and your steel casings, and that they're closely aligned and protect the surface that, or the depths that you're going through. So those are the key concerns that we hear out. Tourism, I would defer to go to Alberta and BC, where they have been drilling and fracking wells for a number of years, and look at their tourism numbers. They haven't declined. Alberta still has the same amount of tourism, and I think, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, we've got such a beautiful coastline, beautiful properties and whatnot, that we can still attract people to come and see what we're doing.
Thank you, but they've got bigger mountains there.
No skiing. Well, yes, there is. Sorry, I'm not a skier.
Catherine, over to you.
Sure. I work on energy issues because I am compelled by the urgency to address climate change. And so I think about the ways in which our energy system contributes to an overwhelming amount of greenhouse gas emissions and human-propelled climate change. I'm really grateful to Heidi for going over a lot of the human health and water risks that are associated with fracking, and that definitely concern me. But the reason that I don't have a favorable opinion of fracking at this point is because I think it has some profoundly negative implications for our energy systems. So I begin with the greenhouse gas emissions. Fracked gas, shale gas, is natural gas. But there are several credible reports, and I'm sure that Heidi has them in her amazing binder, that show us when you take the full life cycle of fracked natural gas into account, the greenhouse gas emissions are equivalent to, if not higher than, burning coal to produce electricity. That is not the case for conventional natural gas, gas that we get from offshore natural gas projects like Sable Island, which of course comes with its own host of potential environmental impacts and problems, but does, when you burn it to produce electricity and take that whole life cycle account into view, does have significantly lesser greenhouse gas emissions than coal. Moving along from the greenhouse gas emissions perspective, let's talk about the fact that America, the United States, is approximately as reliant on coal to produce electricity as Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is in a pretty different case from the rest of the provinces in this country. We rely disproportionately on fossil fuels to produce electricity, whereas other provinces rely a lot on something like hydropower. Our fuel mix, the things that we use to produce electricity here, looks a lot more like the fuel mix of the United States. America is moving pretty substantially away from coal dependence. And the reason that they're doing that is because of the glut of shale gas that is suddenly on their market. So they're moving from depending on coal to depending on natural gas, which in the short term seems like a great opportunity. Use this cheap resource, switch away from coal. We think that maybe in some cases it probably kind of maybe has fewer greenhouse gas emissions. But what's actually happening there is that America is moving from an over-reliance on one finite resource to an over-reliance on another finite resource. No matter how much shale gas there may be on the market right now, that's going to dwindle pretty quickly. This is a non-renewable resource. And I am concerned about the potential of a province like Nova Scotia or a region like Atlantic Canada coming to look at shale gas as something of a new opportunity to develop and to come to over-rely on that in the same way that we currently over-rely on other fossil fuels. We at this point need to transition away from depending on fossil fuels to depending on renewable resources to run our energy systems. We need to do that for plenty of reasons, and they're not just environmental ones. We need to do that for economic reasons as well. And we need to do that to protect our resilience as communities, as economies, as provinces. Right now we have a brittle system that relies on a finite resource. We need to move to a resilient system that relies on renewable resources.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shelley, let me introduce the panel members. Catherine of EAC, Heidi of where are you? Sierra Club, and Terry of CAP, the petroleum producer. Shelley, I'm going to ignore them now, and I'm going to interview you. We're asking questions here, and the very first question is, can you introduce, that's the audience there, can you introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, I'm
Just brief.
Shelley Young. I'm from Eskasoni First Nation. It's the largest community east of Montreal, a Mi'kmaq community. I work here in Halifax at IWK. I was late today because I was working late today. Yeah, I've been very involved in the Indigenous rights movement in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick. So I was involved in Elsipogtog. We actually have an Elsipogtog member here as well. And I really want her to come up maybe later on to say a few words. Okay.
Sure, and,
Yeah. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, great, thank you. And let me catch up by asking you the questions I just asked them. First of all, what would you say would be the key benefits, social, economic, or environmental, of using hydraulic fracturing or fracking? The key benefits.
I really have a hard time talking about benefits of fracking, as I'm very opposed to fracking. But I think what I've learned is that money, there's jobs, there's this, and that's pretty much like all the people have pushed is the benefits is that money, and it's cheaper. Oil is really expensive. But I know, like my family, one of my sisters owns a heating company. So she actually installs natural gas in the home, and he was trying to convince me to do it in my home, and I said, just thinking about it, like to get away from oil, I was starting to think about it, I was thinking that I should do it, right? And then I thought about it, and I said, well, there's enough pipelines out there, like we don't need to be getting into Nova Scotia, like I'm very against it coming to Mi'kmaq, and the territory around here is, we call it Mi'kmaq, New Brunswick, PEI, Quebec, Nova Scotia, it's in the Mi'kmaq territory, and I honestly don't see much benefits.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't even go there.
So, how about my next question? How about adverse impacts of hydraulic fracturing?
Well, it boils down to water. You can't unpoison water. People think that. There's 600 different chemicals in fracking water. They're carcinogen. If that's what we're going to have to deal with. There's a community just recently that had a boil water advisory, and that's very common in Aboriginal communities. But this happened just recently where they had no water for a few days because it was really bad. They had to clean it up. And it was real. People were having a hard time. They were like melting snow outside just to get some water. Could you imagine if that was happening to every single one of us? And basically, the Aboriginal people, what a lot of people don't know is that we still have treaty rights. We have treaty rights, and we have titles to the land. And Aboriginal people feel that, I guess how we're brought up is that we're stewards of the land. We have to take care of the land because we have a strong connection to the land. And as you've known, I don't know if you guys are aware of Elsipogtog, but New Brunswick and Kincomy, not just Elsipogtog, actually the French community, the Anglophone, everybody was coming together this summer, all summer since May, right until, actually they were just out there this past weekend. They've been standing up for their land because their water is everything to them. And yes, people say you can get jobs out of it, but you can actually get more jobs and more opportunities out of renewable resources. Like she was saying earlier, it's just, we're not going to be able to keep up with it. And then what happens down the road? What happens down the road when we're done fracking? We're done installing pipelines that are busting. They're not going to, right now the oil companies are not worried about the implications. They're worried about, putting pipelines in, hiring people, getting it done, and if they blow or whatever happens to them, they're not worried about that because the fines are a lot less than actually fixing the problem. And this is what's happening in out west, and I see people and I talk with people up there and that are going through it, and it's just, I see so many different adverse effects. Animals, when it comes to Aboriginal communities, were, I think that was the question,
About adverse effects to?
to the Aboriginal communities.
Well, yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's that we really rely on hunting, fishing. Well, most of our communities, any funding that comes in for us, like to run the community, is usually through fishing. Fishing and living off the land. A lot of people live off the land. What we're seeing is that, and what we're worried about is what's going to happen when our water is affected. What happens when the land is affected. Right now, there isn't much protection on the lakes in Nova Scotia now with the whole Bill C-45 passing, and that's probably what really, for me anyways, like started to protest. I had never protested before. I protested for Idle No More, and I used to think like I'd never do that. You know, I used to think like there's no way, and then I found out that our water protection was being taken away in Canada, and I literally like couldn't believe it because I have a 3-year-old at home. And I said, what? They're not going to protect our water? I didn't understand it. I was like, how would the government, and how did they get away with that? And I was like, they can't get away with it. So I started to, me and a few other mothers started to come together, and, we're all educated. We're all work in education and health. And really, it's all about your health. And we're thinking of our children, and we're thinking of their children. We said, what happens to our water now? We know that they're taking the protection away. They're coming in, they want to, extend all these pipelines. Meanwhile, we're here, I was in Elizabeth pretty much all summer, trying to go out every weekend when I can, because I live here and I was really trying hard to support them. And the reason why I was out there was, I did my research on fracking. I was looking at what's the fracking impacts in Texas. And this is a Texas-based company, Swin Gas, come in here to try to, put in pipelines in Canada. And so I'm looking into Texas. I'm like, why are they doing it? What's so great about it? So I start to look up videos, YouTube, start reading books. I start reading everything. So I'm just like, I have to know this. And I see like their water literally going on fire. And there's people like, it just freaked me out. And then I see all these spills. I see all kinds of, just terror in a lot of families. And I think about that and I said, why would they? And I understood right away why they were trying to bring it here, because they have no more land really to we know we have natural gas here, so they're looking for it, and they don't really care about the implications what's gonna happen to us. So that's why we continue to fight for it, and I think what's happened there, I think that how many minutes do I have?
Well, you should wrap up now.
Yeah, okay. For me, it's really the government not recognizing our Aboriginal treaty rights to the land, and we do have treaty. Like they were just years ago recognized. We fought for them, and every single time we were in court, we were beaten the Supreme Court. And I think when it boils down to it, like when the Europeans came here, we're here. And we didn't, and we started to fight for land, they started to fight us for the land. We wanted to share the land, because we never said this is our land. We never said that because we didn't see it that way. It wasn't about claiming land. So when we were fighting, and this is how treaties came about, we have peace and friendship treaties. If you guys don't know, Mi'kmaq, this territory, has the strongest treaties in Canada. We were the first to sign treaties, peace and friendship treaties. And basically, when we signed the treaties, we were saying that we would take care of the land and we would share the resources of the land, and that they would have to tell us, basically let us know if there's anything, any changes to land. And they haven't been consulting with the communities. They haven't been consulting. They may be consulting with some leaders, but they're not the leaders aren't consulting with the community members. This is why you see so many people out there saying, we have treaty rights. We have, that one person can't just say that they agreed to fracking or to sit down at these tables. So a lot of people are really against it because, first of all, they're not consulting with us. We're worried about the water. We're worried about our children. We're worried about all the poison. You can't poison water. You can't forget that. So if you're thinking like there's going to be some job opportunities, they're only going to last for so many years, and it's going to be a lot cheaper to hire them if they're coming from the States, to hire them, to pay those guys and bring them down here. So if you think about it, it's not gonna really benefit us down the road. Definitely not your children.
Okay, thank you. So we're kind of caught up now, and it's time for audience participation, whereby we spend about 10 minutes seeing if there's questions so far. And I've got more questions for the panel members following this, but anyone have, yes, please.
I'm just looking at the record of storing of the fracking water divert and the spill, and the comment that perhaps the company will be fined, perhaps not, and the damage that 6,000 to 14,000 liters of that fracking water already done to the surface water. And then I project the excellent casings and the steel and so forth ahead 1,000 years. And I say, what price is poisoning the water forever going to do? How many jobs could you put against that? How many billions of dollars that you can't eat? If the water is poisoned, you have killed all life. And the First Nations are the ones who are signaling this is the wrong path to travel.
Anybody? Well, Shelley's already sort of addressed that. Anyone else?
I guess the question, at the end of the day, the question is what's the impact to the water, and what will we do to fix it if it's broken? You can't fix it if it's broke. I get your concern. We hear that quite a lot. I can't speak to the Kennetcook situation. You know, I know my understanding is that the government and the company are working towards a solution to try to fix that. In New Brunswick, the rules that have been put in place that will work in a closed loop system, that no fluids will touch the ground. So any fresh water or the water you bring in to frack the wells are put into tanks. Any water that comes back out, and there's two types, there's frack fluid and there's produced water. Produced water is already existing in the rock or the shale below there, and it contains salts, elements, naturally occurring elements and stuff like that are brought back up. That's what needs to be treated. Wastewater is something that we need to look at treating because of what's going on with AIS and divert and not allowing the water to be treated here. It can be treated in Ontario. So that I can't speak to per se this particular situation in Kennetcook. What I can tell you is that New Brunswick did adapt the rules so that we're working in a closed system, that no fluids touch the land. If they do, they're treated as an environmental spill, and you would work through your regulatory system to clean that up. In terms of the water, all I can say is that we've fracked 49 wells in New Brunswick safely with no damage to the water. UNB has done studies on groundwater, and you can. Tom Al is a professor at UNB. He worked with his team to study the wells that are there, and said there were low levels of thermogenic gas there, but not whether it's the naturally occurring or not. That's they do believe it's the naturally occurring thermogenic gases, because there is naturally occurring methane in our water aquifers already. So they worked with the Geological Society of Canada, and you can Google that study and see the impact of that. So key to it though is making sure that we have the wellbore integrity going down through as any industry would if you have to go below the subsurface, and making sure that your wellbore integrity is intact.
How do you,
I just want to make a quick
briefly for
comment.
everyone,
Yeah.
please.
Just for those of you that don't know, there were 3 wells in 2007, 2008 that were microfracked by Triangle Petroleum in the Kennetcook area. We've been trying to deal with the water since 2007, 2008 when they were illegally stored in 2 large containment ponds open to the air. I think now there's something like, because of precipitation and stuff, there's like 17 million liters of it. 4.5 million liters of it is at AIS in Divert, Atlantic Industrial in Divert. The rest of it is in Kennetcook, just sitting there, and they're trying to wrangle over what to do with it because it was found to contain naturally occurring radioactive materials. Nova Scotia has uranium in its geology and that sort of thing. Just on the comment of the casings and the steel, Within the industry knows that leaking is a problem, and within the first year, 5% of all casings leak, period. The methane coming out somewhere, maybe it's not strong enough, maybe there's a crack, a fissure. Over time, cement shrinks and becomes more brittle, so over time, more and more wells do leak eventually. Once these are in the ground, they're in the ground to stay. They don't come in, pull it up, pull everything up, and close it all down. Those wells are in the ground to stay. So your comment, thinking forward to 1,000 years, have we been drilling for 1,000 years? Can we, how do you clean up an aquifer? Good question. Yeah.
And we go,
Counterpoint to
question
that, wells are
I
reclamated.
just wanted to
Oh,
say
yeah,
something.
okay, Shelley, yeah.
I just want to say something, on Aboriginal people standing up. I think the reason why is that they've come to the communities now, saying, you know, we're not gonna harm the water, we're not gonna do this, we're not gonna do this. But they did that for Boat Harbor and Pictou. Pictou's not far from here. If you ever drive into Pictou and you smell the sulfur, it's extremely strong. You go in there, there's no way you'll get in that water. Well, when they came to the community and they told them there'll be no harm, you'll be able to fish in that water, be able to do this, because the community lived off that water. They fished in that water, they swam in that water, they used that water. And basically, as soon as they allowed it, because they believed them that, you know, there's going to be no harm done to the water, and they allowed the pulp mill to go through, they said they were going to have all these jobs available for everybody. Basically, almost the next day after that, the water started to turn black. After they signed it, after they agreed to it. Today, people are dying from, there's cancer rates are extremely high in the community. The smell is disgusting. People are really sick, and there's nothing they can do about it. And they try to push them to clean up the water. There's really no way. It's completely poisoned. And, you know, having that happen, do you think we're gonna allow that to happen again? Absolutely not.
Thank you. Question at the back then.
It's more a comment about using New Brunswick as sort of the regulations that exist there as sort of a gold standard or something like this. I personally observed lots of actions going on with Southwestern Energy, including testing for just doing the testing, seismic testing, and at one point they did break through near surface aquifers, which was a clear break of these regulations that you're sort of touting as being very strong. That was a break of Section 37 of the New Brunswick Oil and Natural Gas Act, which calls for action, which calls for, yes, regulations, which calls for stuff to be applied to the company that has broken these rules, and instead, months after the fact, I would return to there frequently and still saw the aquifer at that point spilling out water where the rest of the environment was completely frozen. So, I guess I would suggest that even though you say that these regulations are in place, I think we all know that regulations are only as strong as our ability to enforce them. So, saying that you have a paper tiger in the room that these regulations will somehow guard us against spills, guard us against companies acting with reckless abandon towards the environment is entirely incorrect. The New Brunswick political climate as well is totally, Craig Leonard, for example, his sister, he's the Minister of Energy in New Brunswick, his sister was a lobbyist for, I believe, the Canadian Petroleum Association. His sister also owns a consulting firm that does Aboriginal consultation, as do some of the consultation people for the Assembly of First Nations Chiefs in New Brunswick. So we have this kind of a real situation of collusion that exists between all levels of government. That's sort of the second point, where I would hesitate to, maybe everybody here can just sort of go home thinking about New Brunswick is not the place that we should be looking to as an example of good regulations, because there may be good regulations on paper, but when it comes down to it, Craig Leonard himself, in a sort of what I would interpret as an apologist move for Southwestern Energy, went to Brunswick News, which is an Irving-owned media source, and said the reason that aquifer had been broken and the reason that SWN did not fix it And I guess ostensibly the reason why they didn't bother doing anything about it, the New Brunswick Department of Environment or Energy or Natural Resources, was because the protesters had made it an undesirable climate for SWN to do its work properly. So I guess a bunch of people in the woods scared the 5th largest gas company in North America away from due diligence in their work, and thus, because of that, the government didn't take it seriously. So I'm really concerned about, if this continues, what might happen at the more serious stage of actual drilling.
Okay, thank you.
And gas
Thank you.
extraction.
Does anyone on the panel want to comment, or?
No, I mean, all I can say, I can't speak on the government's behalf, I can't do that. What I can say is my understanding was that, yes, the RCMP told SWN not to come back in due to the protesters and whatnot, so their intention was to go in and fix, but the RCMP told them not to
In fact,
go into that
SMU
place.
had 3 days to finish all their work before leaving for the summer, where community members were accompanying them, monitoring them, cleaning up all the work. So they had ample time, and that's an RCMP law.
Anyone else? No? Okay, I think at this point I'm going to go back to, and there will be more question periods coming up, so we're trying to go back and forth a little bit. Back to the panel if we could now. First question now to Catherine and Heidi. Could you give the audience a bit of an overview? We've already heard a bit about the presence of fracking in Canada and in Atlantic Canada. I think Sherry mentioned it and Catherine as well, but could you give us a bit of a feel for, educate us on where is the fracking, what's the presence of fracking in Atlantic Canada and more broadly in Canada? Where is that? Where is it happening? Where is it located? We've talked about New Brunswick as well, but just give us a feel for what it looks like, because as was mentioned, there's a moratorium in Nova Scotia, so we don't see it outside the campus here. And maybe I'm going to shorten these a little bit, so just 2
I'll
short
give you
minutes each.
2 short minutes, okay. Short minutes, I can do this. So I'll first speak a little bit about Newfoundland. Newfoundland has found what they think is shale oil off their western coast. I was there just this past fall meeting with community groups. There's a community group in Corner Brook, a community group in Stephenville. We had a great meeting with them. And their major concern, one of their major concerns along with the health and stuff, was the tourism aspect of things. And with shale oil in particular, because it's an unconventional resource development, again, they will do high volume, slick water, hydraulic fracturing with horizontal drilling, and they want to position themselves on land and then drill out underneath the ocean along the side there. The thing to note about shale oil is similar to the stuff that is coming from the Bakken right now, which is in the North Dakota area. If you recall, there was an awful tragedy in Lac Mégantic that was carrying that type of oil, shale oil from the Bakken, which would be similar, we would suspect, as the shale oil that would be coming from the west coast of Newfoundland. So Shoal Point Energy still owns 2 leases. We don't have slides, but I do have an artist rendition of Port-à-Port. They drew where they believe the wells would be going out underneath their bay, their beautiful bay that they have there. So if you want to see this closer or want a copy, just email. I can get your email at the end and I can send you that. I can send you everything I have. On PEI, there was a recommendation by the Standing Committee on Agriculture, Environment, Energy, and Forestry. And this was a government, I guess for lack of a better word, bureaucrats or people within the government came together and they made a recommendation that there be a moratorium on PEI, because 2/3 of PEI at one point was leased. To note, in 2006, I believe it was Corridor Resources, they were doing some drilling there, and they had spilled some radioactive fracking sand near to Green Gables for one of their leases, and it was cleaned up. I can't find any information where that eventually went, probably just in a big hole somewhere. But there is groups on PEI. PEI is very concerned about their water because some of the water that they get from underneath the ground, it's the same rock formation that stretches under New Brunswick and a little bit under Cape Breton. So if that aquifer was, if its integrity was compromised and stuff was leached into the aquifer, it could have serious potential impacts for most of Prince Edward Island, which is pretty scary to think about. Water doesn't follow defined boundaries. And I also just wanted to quickly, in the Gulf there is an island called Anticosti Island. I guess it belongs to Quebec. It's an island kind of at the mouth of the St. Lawrence, and they also want to do fracking there. It was just recently announced. There's plans in the work to try and go ahead. This is a pristine environment. 3,000 to 4,000 hunters and anglers visit this island every year, so it'll definitely impact their local tourism, their local businesses that they have there. So that is PEI, Newfoundland, and you go.
So as you've heard, 49 wells in New Brunswick have been hydraulically fractured for natural gas.
4 that are high volume hydraulic fracturing.
Okay, if we want to get picky. In Nova Scotia, we talked a little bit about Connecticut's experience of microfracturing, primarily during the exploration phase, and the resulting total disaster with the wastewater that we've been dealing with for the past 7 years. There is currently a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing in this